Hey, I just got in our next assignment from the Institute. We've been tasked with answering a crucial question. How does fear shape the stories we tell? To unlock the answer, we'll be exploring monsters and urban legends. Well, let's open this up and see where we're headed first. Whoa! Well, this is a little spooky, huh? Where are we? What's up with these bats and this creepy castle? Oh, wait, I think I can make out a sign. It says Bran Castle. Romania! Wait a minute. I think we're researching vampires. Well, I feel like you might already know a thing or two about these creatures of the night. So grab your guided notes and jot down everything you already know. Maybe you said that vampires are undead monsters who are known for feeding on human blood. You may have mentioned that they have fangs, sleep in coffins during the day, and that they're associated with bats. Or maybe you thought of their weaknesses: garlic, sunlight, religious symbols, and wooden stakes. Well, that describes the popular modern version of vampires. Our assignment today goes a bit deeper than that, though. Our goal is to explore the historical origins and evolution of vampire myths. Then we'll discuss the psychological and sociological factors that influence fear and analyze how these factors contribute to the enduring popularity of vampire stories. So, how did the vampire myth originate? Well, stories of blood-sucking monsters and spirits go all the way back to ancient civilizations, thousands of years ago. While each culture had its own version, they shared one common thread: the dead returning to harm the living. Tales of vampire-like beings began in Eastern Europe during the Middle Ages, with vampires becoming popular in folklore throughout Europe in the late 17th century. But these early vampires weren't sleek or seductive. They were more like rotting corpses with a bloated, ruddy appearance. In the 18th century, alleged vampire sightings surged in Eastern Europe, causing a wave of panic known as the Great Vampire Epidemic. In villages across the region, people reported seeing vampires rising from the grave. To stop them, locals would dig up graves in an attempt to prevent the dead from returning as vampires. You see, at this time, vampires represented a very real threat to people. They truly believed that vampires existed and hunted the living. Before we go further, take a moment to think about what associations you have with vampires from stories that you've heard. What do they look like? How do they behave? Jot down your thoughts in your guided notes. Fast forward to 1897, when Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, transformed the vampire myth. Stoker's vampire was intelligent, elegant, and terrifyingly charming. Dracula could blend into society, unlike the mindless monsters of the past. This marked a huge shift. Vampires were no longer just corpses. They were shapeshifters, able to lure their victims with sinister power. Stoker's Dracula became the model for the modern vampire, giving birth to the familiar image of the pale, aristocratic vampire in a cape. In the early 20th century, Hollywood brought vampires into pop culture with movies like Nosferatu and Dracula. These early films cemented the vampire as a cinematic icon, but as society changed and culture evolved, so did the vampire. By the 1980s and 90s, vampires were depicted as rebels and outsiders in popular films and TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Then, in the 2000s, vampires like those seen in the Twilight Saga were portrayed as tragic, even romantic figures. Today, vampires appear in countless forms, across books, movies, and TV. This endless adaptation keeps the vampire relevant, evolving with each generation to reflect its own time and culture. But why are these adaptations endless? Why is generation after generation fascinated by vampires? Let's head inside and shift our focus to fear. So why focus on fear? Well, fear is a powerful force shaping both personal and collective experiences. Psychological fears come from personal anxieties like worries about one's mortality. On the other hand, sociological or collective fears are anxieties shaped by society, like concerns about changes in social norms. So while psychological fears are rooted within us, sociological fears reflect the broader anxieties of the world around us. Why have stories about vampires survived for so long in our collective imagination? The answer lies in the deep, hidden fears they represent. Let's uncover why the vampire myth has such a powerful hold on us. Let's pause and take a moment to consider, what fears could vampires represent? What do you think? As we discuss the fears that vampires represent, fill out the chart in your guided notes. At its core, the vampire myth plays on one of humanity's oldest personal fears: what happens after death? Vampires embody our fascination and horror at crossing the boundary between life and death. They remind us of our own mortality while also defying it. While the fear of death is personal, the idea of the dead returning to disrupt the living is a threat to society. Not only do vampires challenge our collective understanding of what death is, they take the form of predators that hunt us and seek to subvert the human race. Another psychological fear associated with vampires comes from their link to disease. They bring up the fear of illness, losing control of our own bodies, and the idea of being attacked, contaminated, or transformed against our will. Vampires can also represent society's collective anxieties about disease and contagion. Historically, vampire myths surged in times of plague, when communities were struck by illness they didn't understand. People believed that vampires were somehow spreading death among them, leading to the fear that sickness could spread in unseen ways. Lastly, vampires often tap into personal fears of isolation, of being different or misunderstood. For individuals, vampires represent a fear of becoming something outside the accepted norms. Vampires also embody a collective societal fear of the other, an outsider who doesn't belong but hides within society. In Bram Stoker's novel, for instance, Dracula intends to move from Romania to England. Here, the vampire represents the fear of foreign influence and the unsettling idea that something unknown and other threatens society from within. Now let's reflect for a minute. How have these fears manifested in your life or the world around you? Did you notice that these fears are all still relevant today? Vampires let us confront personal anxieties about death, disease, and isolation, while also representing broader social anxieties about contagion and change through storytelling. By reflecting both psychological and sociological fears, vampires have adapted across generations, making them one of the most versatile and lasting mythological monsters. Awesome! We just unlocked another piece of the codex! Be sure to complete your research in your lesson materials and finish up with online practice. Remember, stay legendary! Hey.